LeBron hates Boston. Jaylen Brown's revenge game is set, and the trade Boston almost made. Celtics fans, sit down for this one because we've got a stacked news day, and it starts with a gut punch. An NBA insider just said LeBron James doesn't just dislike the Boston Celtics, he hates them. Number 30 on his list of 30 teams, dead last. And that's not the only bombshell. We're also getting the real story on how close the Celtics came to trading Jaylen Brown to Minnesota instead of Philadelphia. We finally have a return date for Brown's first game back at TD Garden, and Boston made a decision on a young rotation piece that flew under the radar this week. If you're new here, welcome to Celtics Daily Hub, the channel that gets you every angle on Boston basketball, every single day. If you're a returning member of Celtics Nation, you know what to do. Smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, and drop a comment telling me which story hits hardest, because today we've got 5 of them, and we're going in order of what actually matters most. Let's get into it. LeBron James hates the Celtics. Story number 1, and it's the one that's going to dominate NBA Twitter for the next 48 hours. ESPN's Brian Windhorst dropped a stunner on the Hoop Collective podcast. He was asked to rank where the Boston Celtics land on LeBron James's list of 30 teams he'd consider signing with in free agency. Windhorst's answer? Boston would rank 30th, dead last. Windhorst said flatly that LeBron hates Boston, and he didn't hedge on it at all. Now, let's be real, Celtics fans, none of us are shocked. But hearing it confirmed by one of the most plugged-in reporters in the business in those exact terms is still something else. Let's set the table on where LeBron's free agency actually stands. As of right now, the Cleveland Cavaliers, Miami Heat, and Philadelphia 76ers are being treated as the true frontrunners for LeBron in unrestricted free agency. The Golden State Warriors and the Minnesota Timberwolves are still floating around as darker horse possibilities that have drawn some real interest. But Boston? Not even a whisper. Not a single insider has linked the Celtics to LeBron James this entire offseason, and now we know exactly why. Because according to Windhorst, LeBron simply doesn't want any part of it. And look, this rivalry runs deep. We're talking about a guy who has run through basically every era of Celtics basketball. His rivalry with Boston goes back to his first stint in Cleveland, when he was going toe-to-toe with the big 3 of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Ray Allen, with Rajon Rondo running the point. Then he goes to Miami, teams up with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, and that Heat-Celtics rivalry becomes one of the defining storylines of the early 2000s. Then he goes back to Cleveland for round 2, and through all of that, Boston kept showing up on the other side of the bracket. Then, fast forward to the modern era, the Jason Tatum-led Celtics have continued that history, battling LeBron's various rosters on some of the league's biggest stages. 2 full generations of playoff wars. That's not a rivalry that fades. That's a rivalry that calcifies into genuine dislike. And apparently, that's exactly what's happened here. And here's the twist that makes this whole thing sting a little more. Just weeks ago, the Celtics sent Jaylen Brown to the Philadelphia 76ers in one of the most stunning trades in recent NBA history. So now, of all the teams LeBron is reportedly circling as landing spots, Philadelphia, the exact team that just acquired Boston's franchise cornerstone, is one of them. If LeBron ends up signing with the Sixers, Celtics fans are going to have to watch LeBron James and Jaylen Brown sharing a locker room on a division rival, while Boston's front office is still explaining the return they got for Brown. That's the kind of off-season plot twist you can't write. So here's my read on this, and I want to know if you agree in the comments. This isn't really about basketball fit. LeBron could obviously still help a contender. This is about legacy and animosity. He has spent almost his entire career getting his heart broken by, or breaking the hearts of, Celtics fans in the Garden. Signing there now, as a 30-something-year-old chasing one more ring, apparently just isn't something he's willing to consider, no matter how the roster shakes out. Drop a comment. Does this change how you view the rest of LeBron's free agency chase? Or were you already assuming Boston was never in play? Let's move on, because story number 2 directly involves the guy who's now wearing that 76ers jersey. Jaylen Brown's return date to Boston is set. This is the story a lot of you have been waiting on since the trade went down, and now we have real clarity. The Boston Celtics have officially released their preseason schedule, and it includes 2 games against the Philadelphia 76ers. That means Jaylen Brown, the guy who spent a decade in a Celtics uniform, who delivered a championship to this city, who took home Finals MVP, is set to return to Boston for the first time as an opponent, and it could happen as early as this preseason. Let's talk about why this is such a massive story for this fan base specifically. Brown wasn't just a good player who got traded, he was a beloved figure in this city. It's been widely reported, and confirmed by Brown himself, that he never actually wanted to leave Boston. This wasn't a guy demanding a trade out, this was a front office decision. So when he steps back onto that TD Garden floor, whether it's preseason or the regular season, this crowd is going to give him an ovation that shakes the building. 10 years, a championship banner with his fingerprints all over it, 5 All-Star appearances. That's the kind of tenure that earns a hero's welcome, even in an opposing jersey. Now here's where it gets interesting from a scheduling perspective, and this is something Celtics fans should genuinely be frustrated by. Because Philadelphia eliminated Boston from the playoffs last season, you'd think the league would want a Celtics-Sixers matchup on opening night, or at least somewhere prominent in the first week of the regular season. Instead, we're getting 2 preseason meetings, and the actual regular season schedule hasn't even dropped yet, reportedly because the NBA is holding off on releasing it until LeBron James makes his free agency decision, since that decision could reshape entire team schedules around national broadcast windows. So what actually happens when Brown comes back? There are basically 3 ways this plays out, and it's worth breaking down each one. Scenario 1. Brown comes to Boston in the preseason, does all his media obligations, and gets the emotional moment out of the way early, then simply refuses to talk to reporters when the Sixers visit during the actual regular season, treating that one as strictly business. That would track, by the way, because Brown was known during his Celtics tenure for not doing pregame interviews at home, so a version of him locked in and silent for a business-only regular season return would fit his personality. Scenario 2. He plays in the preseason like normal, no drama, just basketball. Scenario 3, and this is the one that would be the wildest television. Brown comes to Boston for the preseason game, but doesn't actually play, saving his literal on-court return for the regular season, when the stakes and the crowd will be even bigger. Whichever way it goes, mark your calendars, because when Jaylen Brown sets foot on that TD Garden hardwood in a different jersey, it's going to be one of the most emotional moments in recent Celtics history, right up there with Ray Allen's return in a Heat jersey. If you were in Boston, or watching when that happened, you know exactly what kind of reception we're talking about. Now here's a question for the comment section. Do you think Boston fans cheer Jaylen Brown? Boo him? Or is it going to be that weird mixed reaction where half the building is standing and clapping and the other half doesn't know how to feel? I genuinely don't know how this crowd reacts, and I want your prediction below. All right, that trade brings us to our next story, because we finally have real insight into who else was in the mix to acquire Jaylen Brown before he ended up in Philadelphia. And it turns out, Boston almost sent him somewhere completely different. The trade Boston almost made. Timberwolves rejected a Jaylen Brown deal. Okay, this is the story that's going to make Celtics fans say, "Wait, what?" out loud. According to John Krasinski of The Athletic, the Minnesota Timberwolves actually explored a blockbuster trade for Jaylen Brown before he ended up getting shipped to Philadelphia. Minnesota held real discussions with Boston about acquiring Brown. But here's the catch. The Celtics were reportedly asking for a king's ransom in return, and that package centered on one specific player, Rudy Gobert. Let that sink in for a second. Boston wanted the four-time Defensive Player of the Year, plus significant future draft capital in exchange for Jaylen Brown. Think about what that would have meant. Boston viewed Gobert as the centerpiece of a rebuilt front court around Brown's replacement package. And honestly, if you're the Celtics trying to reload after moving your second star, going after a defensive anchor like Gobert makes a ton of sense on paper. But Minnesota said no. They weren't willing to give up Gobert while also handing over major draft compensation. And it wasn't just about protecting Gobert. There were reportedly real fit concerns on Minnesota's end about pairing a high-usage, isolation-heavy scorer like Jaylen Brown next to Anthony Edwards, who operates in a pretty similar way offensively. Two ball-dominant wings who both want the rock in crunch time is a tricky fit to build around, and it sounds like that gave the Timberwolves front office real pause. Worth noting, Edwards himself was never actually part of the trade talks, so this wasn't Boston trying to pry away Minnesota's franchise cornerstone. This was specifically a Gobert-centered offer. And it turns out Jaylen Brown wasn't even the only superstar swing Minnesota took this offseason. Krasinski also reported that Timberwolves president Tim Connolly pursued Giannis Antetokounmpo, not once, but twice. Once before the season even started, and again around the trade deadline. Multiple attempts to engage Milwaukee, and according to the report, Minnesota never even got close to an actual agreement for a two-time MVP. On top of that, the Timberwolves also reached out to the Chicago Bulls about guard Josh Giddey, viewing him as a bigger backcourt piece who could play alongside Edwards and add size and playmaking. Those talks reportedly went nowhere too. So here's the wild part. Minnesota swung and missed on Jaylen Brown, on Giannis Antetokounmpo, and on Josh Giddey, all in the same stretch. And their answer to striking out on three different superstar targets? They pivoted and landed guard LaMelo Ball instead. Now let's bring this back to Boston, because this really reframes the entire Jaylen Brown trade saga. It means the Celtics weren't just negotiating with Philadelphia in a vacuum. They had multiple suitors circling, and they specifically tried to leverage Brown into a deal that would have brought back a top-tier defensive center in Rudy Gobert. When that fell through because Minnesota wouldn't budge, Boston pivoted to the deal that actually happened, sending Brown to Philadelphia for Paul George and a package of 4 future draft picks. What Boston actually got: Paul George, 2028 and 2031 first-round picks, 2028 and 2030 second-round picks. And that return has been getting hammered by league executives since the moment it was announced. One anonymous NBA general manager told ESPN's Tim McMahon that Brown got traded for less than what Walker Kessler would have fetched on the market, which, if you know anything about roster valuation, is a brutal comparison for a guy who was a top 6 MVP vote-getter and second-team All-NBA just last season. Even Charles Barkley, a Sixers legend himself, has publicly said Philadelphia got away with one on this deal. So when you line all of this up, Minnesota wanting Brown but balking at giving up Gobert, Boston reportedly miscalculating how fixated Sixers owner Josh Harris was on landing Brown, and insiders suggesting the Celtics could have squeezed even more out of Philadelphia, it paints a picture of a front office that maybe didn't have as much leverage as they thought they did, or didn't use the leverage they had as well as they could have. I want to hear your take on this one specifically, because I think this is genuinely the most divisive story of the day. Would you rather Boston had held out and landed Rudy Gobert from Minnesota? Or are you fine with the Paul George and draft capital package they ended up getting from Philadelphia? Comment section, go. The Mitchell Robinson hype videos, separating fact from fiction. All right, switching gears to something a little lighter, but still worth talking about, because it's blowing up on Celtics Twitter right now. Mitchell Robinson signed with the Celtics as a free agent earlier this month, coming over as an NBA champion straight from the New York Knicks. He's going to be a genuinely important piece in the front court, giving Boston another legitimate center option to pair alongside Neemias Queta. That part is real, and that part matters. Boston needed size after this offseason's roster turnover, and Robinson brings real rim protection and interior presence. But here's what's actually going viral right now, and it's become a running joke every single offseason with this guy. Videos have started circulating showing Robinson looking like a completely different player. There's a clip of him showing off ball handling and shooting touch in what's being called the Joe Mazzulla offense. And separately, Celtics fans have latched onto footage of Robinson knocking down free throws at what looks like a 60% clip in a casual setting. Now, before anybody gets too excited, let's pump the brakes with some actual numbers. Robinson is a career 50.8% free throw shooter. And last season specifically, he shot a rough 40.8% from the line. Could he improve on that? Sure, it's possible. Is it going to be some dramatic transformation because of one off-season clip? Almost certainly not. And as for the three-point shooting angle, this one's almost funny when you look at the full picture, because Mitchell Robinson has never attempted a single three-pointer in an NBA regular season game. Not one. Ever. Maybe Boston lets him fire a few up in the preseason just to see what happens, given how their offense likes to space the floor. But expecting him to become a perimeter weapon is not a realistic read. This is honestly just an NBA offseason tradition at this point. Players look like completely different athletes in shorts and t-shirt runs during the summer, with no real defense, no game pressure, and no film study from an opponent. Ben Simmons was famous for this exact phenomenon. Every summer, mixtape clips would surface of him knocking down jumpers, and then the regular season would start, and that jumper would completely vanish. NBA-level competition exposes things that look great in a low-stakes gym session. So, the bottom line here, Mitchell Robinson is a real, valuable addition to this Celtics roster as a rim-running, rebounding, shot-blocking center. That part isn't hype, that's just good roster building. But don't walk into next season expecting a stretch 5 version of Mitchell Robinson, because that guy does not exist, and probably never will. Jordan Walsh's contract gets guaranteed. Last story of the day, and it's a smaller one, but it tells you something real about where this roster is headed. NBA Summer League has wrapped up, and the Celtics made a decision on Jordan Walsh's future. His contract officially becomes fully guaranteed at $2.4 million. According to SpotRack's Keith Smith, Walsh will now be extension eligible for the rest of the season, and he could sign an extension worth up to 140% of the average player salary, which starts around $21.2 million annually. Now, nobody's expecting Walsh to actually get a deal anywhere close to that number, but the guarantee itself is the real headline here. It means he isn't going anywhere, at least not before training camp. Let's talk about who Jordan Walsh actually is for those who haven't been tracking him closely. He's 22 years old, out of the University of Arkansas by way of Texas, stands 6'6", and has already played parts of 3 NBA seasons in Boston. His rookie year was mostly quiet, barely any playing time, but he took a real step forward in his second season, appearing in 52 games. And then last season was clearly his best yet, playing in 68 games with 25 starts. Across that most recent season, Walsh averaged 5.4 points, 4.0 rebounds, 0.8 assists, 0.7 steals, and 0.5 blocks a night. Those aren't gaudy numbers, but for a 22-year-old wing getting real rotation minutes, that's legitimate development. The most important number in that stat line, though, might be his three-point shooting, which jumped up to 38.4%, a real, meaningful improvement from where it had been earlier in his career. And that matters a lot for his long-term fit, because the wing rotation in Boston is genuinely crowded right now. If Walsh's improved shot is legitimate and repeatable, he's got a real path to holding a rotation spot even once Jason Tatum is back to full health for a complete season. If it turns out to be a small sample fluke, he becomes a lot more replaceable in a crowded room. Boston's front office essentially bought themselves more time here. They didn't extend him long-term, they didn't trade him, they just locked in the guarantee and let him keep proving his case. His job now is simple. Show that last season's jump was real, not a blip, and give Brad Stevens and the coaching staff a real reason to keep him in the rotation mix long-term. LeBron, Jaylen Brown in Sixers jersey, Gobert, Mitchell Robinson, Jordan Walsh. All right, let's recap where this Celtics offseason actually stands. LeBron James, according to insiders, wants nothing to do with Boston. And honestly, after everything this rivalry has been through, that tracks. Jaylen Brown's emotional return to TD Garden is now on the calendar in some form this preseason, and it's going to be one of the biggest moments of the year, regardless of how the Celtics feel about it. We learned Boston actually tried to leverage Brown into landing Rudy Gobert from Minnesota before that deal fell apart and the Philadelphia trade happened instead. Mitchell Robinson is a real defensive upgrade at center, even if the viral highlight videos are getting a little ahead of reality. And Jordan Walsh just bought himself a longer runway to prove he belongs in this rotation going forward. This is a franchise very clearly in transition, moving on from a franchise cornerstone, rebuilding around Tatum, and restocking the front court while young pieces like Walsh fight for their spot. It's going to be a fascinating season to watch unfold. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of die-hard Celtics fan this channel is built for. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, drop a like on this video, and let me know in the comments which of these 5 stories you think is the biggest deal for Boston's future. LeBron staying away, the Jaylen Brown return, the trade that almost happened, the Mitchell Robinson addition, or the Jordan Walsh contract news. I'll be back tomorrow with another full breakdown. Until then, this has been Celtics Daily Hub. Stay green.